Thomas had never ventured outside his assigned part of the forest before, and when he finally did it, it changed his life forever. He stumbled upon a weird object embedded in a mountain wall, and from the first moment he saw it, he knew he had no choice but to call the police immediately. Thomas never expected his journey to end this way. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Thomas looked at the object lying in front of him. He didn't have the patience to wait for the police to arrive. He carefully started to chip pieces away but hit it at the wrong spot, shattering the object on the ground. Now that Thomas could see what was inside of it, he knew he got more than he bargained for. The police arrived as the inside of the object lay bare in the sunlight. Thomas had never seen anything like this before and tried to explain everything to the cops. But when they arrived, they instantly put Thomas in handcuffs. They wouldn't tell Thomas what was happening and immediately took him into custody. Thomas freaked out. "What's this all about? Answer my questions." But they only replied, "Thomas, we know what you've done. What was so special about the inside of the object? Why did Thomas get arrested? And how do they know his name?" Thomas had seen a lot of weird things in his life. He worked as a forester in the mountains, and people left the strangest things behind after camping in the woods. He had jurisdiction over the right side of the forest and the mountain behind it. The left side was assigned to his colleague, Michael. Thomas and Michael didn't get along very well, so they tried to stay away from each other. Thomas lived alone in a cabin in the woods. He had no wife or family and was one with nature, as he would describe it. He wouldn't have it any other way, at least not at this moment. Thomas always planned his whole week ahead. He had a lot of ground to check, so he found it best to cut it up into different parts. Today, he would check the forest's edge and the mountain's base. Nobody is allowed to climb the mountain, but some people do it anyway, so Thomas has to check up on that. And just as he expected, someone was at the mountain's base, gearing up to climb the mountain. "Hey buddy, you aren't allowed to climb here," Thomas said to the stranger. The guy was a little annoyed, but eventually left. "I don't understand why people want to climb so badly here. It's way too high," Thomas muffled to himself. He wondered why people chose this specific mountain to climb. There were more mountains on the left side of the forest. He continued his plan for the day, but kept thinking about the mountain. And after he finished everything, he returned. He couldn't get it out of his head and needed to see it for himself. There was a walking trail and a climbing trail. Thomas is no climber, so he took the walking trail. He just wanted to see where the trail led to. "I need to find out why people find this mountain so special." But when Thomas looked down after a few minutes, he was shaking on his feet. Thomas is afraid of heights. Thomas looked down and realized he was so high he could see the tips of the trees. He grabbed a big rock nearby and clamped himself to it. "How will I ever get down again?" It was getting late and the sun had started to set. He needed to go back to his base as soon as possible. Finally, Thomas gathered the courage to walk down the trail. He had a few panic attacks in the process, but when he reached the ground, he was proud of himself. He promised himself to try and walk that trail every day from that day on. He wanted to beat his fear of heights, and after a few weeks, he had finally done it. He had reached the top of the mountain. Thomas was so proud of himself that he wanted to tell someone, but he had no one to tell. So he decided to pay a visit to his colleague, Michael. Michael was skeptical of Thomas's visit, but after hearing his story, he was happy for him. He never knew Thomas had a fear of heights. That was very uncommon for someone who worked as a forester. He wondered what else he didn't know about Thomas. Michael thought back at their differences and couldn't remember why they had them in the first place. Thomas had a good feeling about himself when he returned home. He had never expected to get so much support from Michael, not after what Thomas did to him. He had always regretted that day, but it seemed like Michael had forgiven him. Why else would he react so positively to Thomas's visit? For the next few weeks, Thomas hikes up and down the trail daily. He is ecstatic that his fear of heights is gone. But after walking the same trail day after day, he got the desire to find a new trail. His fear of heights disappeared, but a different side of Thomas showed up, a side he'd never seen before. Thomas felt adventurous. He took a few days off to explore the mountains surrounding the forest. He began by traveling to the furthest point of the forest he'd ever been, and from there, he just kept walking. He walked for 2 days without finding something, until he did find something. On his third day, he reached the base of a mountain he had never seen before. It was a small but gorgeous mountain. Thomas wandered around, searching for a trail that would lead him to the top of the mountain. And after a few minutes, he finally found one. A very mysterious an old-looking one. It looks like no one had walked on this trail in ages. Maybe it's not such a good idea after all. But that actually sparked Thomas's curiosity even more. It looks so overgrown with plants, and it seems like no one has been here in over 10 years. What could I possibly find along this trail? Thomas asked himself. While walking down the trail, Thomas scratched himself a few times on his legs. One gouge was so deep he needed to bind a piece of his shirt around it. The trail was much harder than Thomas thought it would be. There were loose rocks everywhere and a lot of overgrown prickly bushes, but that didn't scare him. Even though Thomas was hurt, he still continued. He had a feeling that there was something along this trail. I just need to push through long enough until I find whatever it is that's on the end of the trail. And he was glad he did, because he found something that would shock the world. Thomas had reached the end of the trail. It didn't stop at a high point with beautiful views. No, the trail stopped because he reached a wall. It was a high and narrow wall that looked like it was formed over time. Thomas took a closer look and noticed something strange. There was something inside the wall. He couldn't really see what it was, so he decided to hack into it. Luckily, he had brought a little hammer and chisel with him just in case he got stuck somewhere. He chiseled for a few minutes and the wall started to crumble away. It revealed something Thomas had never seen before. He took a step back to take everything in. He was speechless. Thomas stood there, staring at the object inside the wall. He couldn't move, couldn't think. What on earth is this thing? He wondered. Thomas wanted to clean up more of the object, but he had no idea what he was truly dealing with. Thomas chiseled some more on the object itself, and it broke into two. He took one look inside and had to call the police immediately. It turned out that Thomas had found an ancient fossil and accidentally broke it. Luckily for him, the archaeologists could restore it, and all was well.